Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast, episode number 94. My name is Greg Huss. I'm one of your hosts, and today I'm joined by another voice, a new voice on the podcast. I'm joined by Tommy Birch of the Des Moines Register. Tommy, it's the first time having you on, man. Welcome aboard.
This has been the highlight of my day. I've been waiting all day for it. No, I was super pumped when you asked me to be on. Like I've told you, I'm a big fan of your stuff, your work, and how much you follow the minor league system.
Dude, it's absolutely wild to me. I mean, I've honestly, hand up, I've dropped the ball over the past 93 episodes by not having you on to this point. This is a me problem, not a you. Actually, you know what? You know what the real problem is? It's a Alex Cohen problem. I blame Alex Cohen because he just wants to talk too much, and so he wants to come on the show. So I blame him. I think that's safe,
That's
right?
good to do. Yeah, when in doubt, blame Cohen. It's been. I know we're gonna talk a lot of Cubs, but it's like, man, it's been so. I love the new broadcaster for the Iowa Cubs, Jason, but it's been different not having Alex Cohen around. It's a lot quieter. It's a lot thinner, too.
Yeah, that's I mean, anytime we get the chance to rag on Alex Cohen on the show, we take advantage of that opportunity. But no, I mean, like I said, I appreciate you coming on. I think this is great. Obviously, you cover. I guess since it's the first time on, you want to give a little bit of description about yourself, what you do, why you're on the show. I guess.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm on. That's a good question. No, I'm the Iowa Cubs beat reporter for the Des Moines Register. I've been covering the team since, man, I don't even know, 2011, 12, something in there. I did a little bit of coverage before that too. I actually interned for the Iowa Cubs in 2008 as a media relations intern. Born and raised in Des Moines, so I've followed the Iowa Cubs pretty much my entire life. I think my first so I grew up a Minnesota Twins fan because the first baseball game I ever went to was at the Metrodome, and you obviously fall in love with Kirby Puckett, stuff like that. And I remember like one of my first favorite baseball players was this guy Matt Walbeck, a catcher for the Cubs, who ended up getting traded to the Twins in like one of my first Iowa Cubs games. I remember seeing Matt Walbeck play, and then he got traded to the Twins. I was like, oh my god, this guy is the coolest dude ever. And I think it would have been 2 years ago. I interviewed Walbeck for like the 30th anniversary story of the time the Iowa Cubs last won a championship, the 1993 American Association title on a walk off by Tuffy Rhodes. And I was reaching out to former players about that title team, and Matt Walbeck was on the team. And remember like dropping all my journalism ethic cards at the door. And when I was a little kid, I was a big girl, and he was like, "Man, there was a Matt Walbeck, pretty pretty cool." So, long story short, yeah, I've been around the Iowa Cubs for.
Yeah, that's. I mean that's like the coolest story. That is really really cool. What's when you said you were a media relations intern for the iCubs back in 07, 08. Who were some of the players on the team back then? You remember?
Yeah, Matt Murton, Eric Patterson. It's so wild because Matt Murton was on the team back then, and then when I started covering the team, he ended up coming back to um, the Cubs a couple of years ago, and then Eric Patterson over the last couple of years, he's not on the coaching staff anymore, but he was a part of the Iowa Cubs coaching staff, and I remember like being at the park the night that both those guys were traded to I think it was the Oakland A's back then, but or now the Sacramento A's, but yeah, there were some really good players like Neil Kotz was on that team. Coy Hill, um, Felix PA. Like I remember, um, part of my job for the internship was, this was one. If I told this story, it would sound like I did absolutely nothing. One of the things games was print off the box scores and take them to all the staff members on both the away team and the home team, and Felix PA was so obsessed with his stats and his numbers that I had to print off a box score for him after every game because like I'd be on my way to the office of Pat Listash. He was the manager at the time, and like Felix would stop me. Just like I don't know how long it could take a guy to look at 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts, but Felix took a long time to do it. So I just got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna print you off your own, and I'm gonna go. Bobby Scales, he was on that team too. My now that I started thinking of some of the names, like,
Dude, those are some names, man. Those those are like really good. Honestly, that for me, like that era of, I mean, those are all the guys in AAA, but all those guys you mentioned ended up making it up to the bigs at some point, and it's like that I think is, I mean, I obviously remember Cubs teams prior to those years, but I think like those though that era of Cubs team is when I was like when I like became a true sicko. Like when I was like, oh, like I'm living and dying by what the Chicago Cubs do. I think it's like that era, right? It's I was a fan before that, but it's like I not that it made me become a Cubs prospect podcaster at that point, but it's like I think that was where I was, that's where that was the beginning of the end of my craziness in terms of Cubs fandom, I think, was back then.
that's really cool. I mean, I love looking back at some of the years like before I started covering the team and really got to like I always followed them. I wasn't a Cubs fan, but you were an Iowa Cubs fan if you lived in Des Moines. And one of my favorite stories to tell is like I was in high school at the time that Mark Pryor was first coming up, and that was before, prospect rankings, but everybody knew, Mark Pryor, that guy is going to be a dude. And um I ended up writing a story about this, like retracking like 25, 30 years after his AAA debut. But when he was in Des Moines, his first start in Des Moines, he threw like 5, 6 innings, struck out like 12, hit 2 home runs. And I remember like I was in high school. I had just come from like high school baseball practice. My dad and I were walking into the stadium and into our seats right as Pryor hit home run number 2, and I can still see him rounding the bases and the dudes in front of us going, he's not even going to stop at the Cubs dugout. He's just going to go straight to Chicago. And it's pretty wild. That's the stories like that are kind of why I love covering minor league baseball. When you've been around long enough that you probably know this, like back in the day, um, in the minor leagues, you weren't pitching. If you kind of depended on the team, if you started the day before, you're going to start the next day, you would have to sit in the stands and like chart pitches. I remember like Harry Wood being out in the stands just with a radar gun and clipboard charting pitches, and people just had no idea who he was. And um the stuff like that is just why I love covering minor league baseball.
Dude, imagine Cade Horton sitting 10 rows deep behind home plate charting right now for the Iowa Cubs. That'd be insane.
Oh, what's funny is it was still a practice um that was being done like maybe 7, 8 years ago, and Barry Zito, who was still like bouncing around the minor leagues. Usually once you get to like a veteran level status or a guy that had even been to the big leagues, usually in the minor leagues they tell you no, you didn't have to do it, or you would pay a younger guy to do it. But Barry Zito, like at the back end of his career, like I think last year that he was pitching in pro baseball, um, sure enough, got in the stands and was turning pitches. And there was a diehard season ticket holder for the Iowa Cubs who was a diehard Giants fan. And I remember like talking to Barry, like seeing this guy was sitting next to him, and I was like, what do you say to you?" And he said, "Man, I loved you early in your career in San Francisco. Towards the end, not so much, but yeah, it's amazing. Some prospects don't know what they're missing on right now."
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a really cool story. All right, man. So I mean, today, so we obviously, you are there in the ballpark, covering the team on a daily basis. This weekend, we saw opening night, opening weekend for the Iowa Cubs. We are recording this on Monday, the 31st, and this upcoming week we have the kickoff to the other affiliates, the Knoxville Smokies, the South Bend Cubs, and the Myrtle Beach Pelicans will start up on Friday night. But this past weekend and starting on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we get to focus entirely on the Iowa Cubs and what they are doing by themselves in the minor league system. And so I thought this was a good opportunity to just kind of hone in on what we saw this opening weekend, because there's a lot of takeaways. Obviously, I guess I apologize for those of you guys listening that are not looking for Iowa Cubs. We've talked Iowa Cubs a lot over the past month or so, right? Between this episode focused on Iowa, we did the Iowa Cubs preview with Alex Cohen. We did the kind of a quasi preview with Jason Kempf, broadcaster, prior to that, and so we've done a lot of Iowa Cubs content. But honestly, like, the thing is this Iowa Cubs team is the team to talk about. This is where the prospects are. This is where all of our top 100 prospects are located, is in Iowa right now, and so there's a lot to take away, even from just two games. We saw Sunday's game get rained out and postponed. That's moved, I think, to Omaha when they play in Omaha later in, I think, June. Is that what it is? And so,
Like,
yeah, yeah. And so we ended up seeing two games instead of three games, but there's still plenty to talk about. I think that I wanted to just hit on some players and what we saw from them. But I think before we do that, I think one thing I want to mention and I want to talk about is the most interesting thing that happened this weekend, potentially, is something that happened before a first pitch was even thrown. And that was the fact that Owen Caissie was on the roster and not on the injured list to start off the year, which is was a little bit surprising to me. I didn't expect to see him back right away to start off the season. I saw you posted a video of him taking batting practice, and I was like, all right, like, it's on, like, it's happening. So were you surprised to see him there? What was your takeaway from seeing Owen Caissie in the lineup starting game one?
yeah, I was a little surprised too, given some of the reports we're hearing during spring training. I thought that, kind of the idea they've been dinged up and kind of slow to get back into games, that, they may want to take their time with him, especially given, like, traditionally when you look at the weather in Iowa at the start of the year, really not good. It's cold, it's damp, it's wet. It's not ideal to go from Arizona to that, especially if you've been hurt. But um, my understanding is they ran him through a workout in Des Moines. I think the day of the first game or the day before, just see how he felt. Looked good, did well, felt well. They put him on the opening day roster, and then he ended up hitting a home run in that first game. So during BP, looked great. I will say a lot of people looked great during BP that day, because the wind was blowing out in a big way to right field, and everybody was like jumping to get into the batting cage. But even the balls, just without the wind, they look sharp. I think he was a little rusty at times during the first two games, where it looked like he was kind of getting his timing back, which kind of adds to, like, man, the fact that he was able to hit a home run during that first game speaks volumes to just the skill set that he does have.
Yeah, no, when I saw some I think pictures from Rich Biesterfeld down in Arizona of Owen Caissie taking some fly balls and taking some batting practice, I was like, oh, sweet, like, okay, like he's on track to come back. Maybe we see him in at the end of the month, at the end of April or something like that. And then, yeah, saw him on that opening day roster, listed there, not, or as a healthy person. And so, like, that was fun to see. And you're right, the home run was, it was a laser, hit at 426, 105 off the bat, I believe is what it was. And I mean, that's what we're tuning in to watch from Owen Caissie. I think one thing I want to talk about with Owen Caissie is, like, it's interesting to me because one thing, when you hear people talk about a guy with, like, this crazy power that Owen Caissie has, what you don't think about is watching a swing that looks like Owen Caissie's, right? You don't watch Owen Caissie swing and be like, oh, that's like a beautiful swing. That's a Ken Griffey Jr. looking swing. It's not really from Owen Caissie from the left side of the plate. Like, it's a swing that was catered early on to going the opposite way, hitting that left center gap. And I think it still looks like that. And when he makes contact and pulls the ball in the air, the swing doesn't really match the result of the ball, I think, in a lot of ways.
Sure, yeah, and what's interesting too is, you talk to people in the Cubs organization, at least last year, they were saying his exit velo numbers are some of the best, not just in the system, but in all minor league baseball too. So wherever he is hitting the ball, he has the ability to go the other way and hit with power. He can pull the ball with power. He can use all sorts of field for power. But I think the key is when it comes to Owen Caissie, is that when he connects on the ball, it's usually going to be hit pretty hard. So he's got an amazing skill set even outside the power where he's got some sneaky speed. He made some decent plays in right field too, where I went into the season saying like, man, I feel like Owen Caissie is like one of the forgotten prospects when it comes to this roster, or this entire minor league system because I honestly I don't know why. I think part of the reason is he hasn't made his big league debut yet. A lot of attention has kind of been on Kevin Alcantara, who rightfully so, ended up playing well last year, got his big league debut. But I think when people look at the roster and what's taking place in Chicago, if there an injury to possibly happen, Kevin's probably gonna get that first call ahead of Owen Caissie is kind of the feeling that I get. So maybe that's part of the reason why people are tending to overlook Owen Caissie a little bit, and the fact that like I kind of wonder if there are a lot of people that just, at least from the thing, have kind of just moved on from Owen Caissie just to not get too attached because um, we've heard his name pop up in trade rumors for 1-2 years, and I think part of the deal is they're just like, okay, we're almost expecting Owen Caissie to go, but I don't know where he fits into things, but he's a hell of an athlete with a ton of tools.
Dude, I honestly I hadn't thought about it from that perspective where it's like I think fans are like he's been rumored to be traded. Like he's been in trade conversations, right? From a fan perspective for the past two full years. And you're right. It's like from a fan perspective, you're like, all right, like if he's gonna be traded, like I don't want to Cam Smith this guy. Well, which actually, if Owen Caissie was with the Astros, he'd be batting in the four hole for the Astros right now at the major league level because what we've seen from Cam Smith, right? But like I think that's exactly right. That we're kind of like, oh, like I don't want to become attached because he's going to be on a different team. And I think the same could be said with James Triantos to a certain degree as well. Where like when we talked with Alex Cohen, like obviously he's a huge believer in James Triantos, but he's another guy who's been rumored to be in trade talks for the past 2 years. And we saw James Triantos this weekend look pretty good. Put a couple hits together on Saturday's game. He had a few, two or three stolen bases this weekend. And really, what caught my eye the most from James Triantos this weekend was he had three hard hit balls, like the baseball savant metric of 95 plus. He had three hard hit balls this weekend, which is like the thing I maybe the most focused on James Triantos of anything that he does this year.
Yeah, and I think maybe one or two of those ended up as hits because I think at least one of his hits was like 55 miles an hour to the other way. But I mean, like, man, that dude, uh, I call him kind of the contact king of the organization because he just goes up to the plate and he's thinking about putting the ball in play, and he usually some really good contact, and he's kind of like a little bit of a throwback type of player where he has some power, he has some pop, but that's not the emphasis, and it seems like the Cubs are kind of okay with that. You see so many organizations and we've seen this with players in the Cubs organization as well too, who they end up hitting for average, they end up hitting, getting on base and stuff like that. But so many teams valued the power and wanting to see the uptick in home runs and stuff like that. But James Trianto seems like um, kind of a type of player that they're really happy with the skill set that he has, and they kind of seem convinced to develop him around that town. That's putting the ball in play, that's getting on base, that's stealing bases, and that's kind of playing wherever he may end up being in the field. They love his versatility. He's played second, he's played third. This all past, not in the two games in Iowa so far, but he's played second, he's played third, he's played center. I think the game plan is to have him play in the corner spots in the outfield as well. So they just want to find a way to get him on the field, and his path is potentially interesting too because you look at what could possibly happen with Nico Horner. I kind of wonder what does that mean for James Triantos? Is he a guy that could potentially slide into that spot, or is he going to be more of a Ben Zobrist type guy that just moves all around the field and does just a ton of good things? I don't know for sure, but like he does a ton of really good things really well. Um, he's somebody that he was dinged up at the end of last year, so we didn't really get to see a ton of what he could do. We saw some of it last year, but now that he's healthy, like this year, you can totally see a totally different player and just how good he could be and why the Cubs are so high on him.
47 stolen bases last year, I believe for yeah,
He
for
And he told me, like, when he gets on base, he is always thinking steal. If the base is open, he is going to try to steal it. And what's funny is like I'm working on a story about him, so I don't hear this story, but it is such a good story. His dad told me when he was a little kid, like he would intentionally get into rundowns because he's wanted to be in a hot box situation all the time. He would just he would get walked and immediately round first and go a second and stuff like that. But um, I don't think James Triantos has ever been like if I haven't looked at his numbers yet. His 40-yard time, whatever, and stuff like that. But he doesn't have like blazing speed. He just has a really good approach and a hunger to cause chaos on the base pass.
he has never looked overwhelmed a day in his life at the plate or on the bases. I'd imagine, and I mean, I guess what do you got? 47 stolen bases over under this year for James Triantos.
I'm gonna take the over just because I think like one, he's gonna be more comfortable at AAA now that he got a little bit of taste of it. Two, like think about how much time he ended up missing last year because he was hurt. So I think find that with the improvements he's made during the offseason and the idea that like he has the green light to steal whenever he wants, yeah, I'll take the over. I mean, talking like Billy Butler type numbers almost.
I think the one thing too with him is that because I think that it's probably unlikely that we see him in Chicago this year. I mean, a lot has to go right in terms of like wrong at the major league level for him to get called up with injuries and stuff like that. So I think that it gets hairy for that situation. But because of that, he could log 145 games in AAA, and there's your like volume in terms of how you kind of rack up those stolen bases. Most stolen bases in the organization last year since the goat John Andrioli, right?
Yeah, yeah, it sounds right. I mean, and John ended up, man, he produced a nice little big league career with, I think stops in Seattle, Baltimore, maybe somewhere else. But I mean, James is a real fascinating player, especially during this era too, where he definitely is kind of that throwback type player. So, and I think kind of the cool thing too is I think regardless of where you play him in the field, whether that's second, third, maybe even short, all the outfield spots, I think he will more than handle himself. And he's that type of athlete. He's a really good athlete and just kind of a gamer, as everybody likes to say.
Let's go from James Triantos, who had a surprising number of hard hit balls this weekend, to Moises Ballesteros, who we expect to hit the ball hard every single time he comes to the plate, who actually led the team in hard hit balls this weekend with four. He had four hard hit balls. He had two hits on Friday, including a double. Moises Ballesteros looked pretty comfortable at the plate for the most part. A couple at bats where he looked off kilter, I guess is the best way to describe it. But for the most part, looked pretty comfortable at the plate this weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess really not surprised given what he did last year and being one of the youngest players in minor league baseball. And it sounds like he's just had a tremendous offseason. There were two big takeaways that I was really impressed with in terms of kind of off the field stuff. Like, one, when I first saw him, I was like, okay, this is a dude that's lost some weight, looks pretty good, looks sharp, kind of looks a little bit more built. And two, his English was phenomenal. You could tell that's something um, that he is focused in on a lot. I know that's not a big thing when it comes to, what fans are really paying attention to, but I think it speaks volumes to just the effort that he's putting into everything he's doing during the off season. And people tend to forget too, like, his bat is so advanced. Like, we're talking one of the best bats in all minor league baseball, that I think people get caught up in the idea that, like, okay, the bat's so good, why is he not a great catcher? And I think he's a solid catcher. Um, he obviously has some areas that he's got to grow in that part of the game, but for his age, for his experience, and for kind of a lack of reps he's had a pretty good spot when it comes to catcher. And everybody that you talk to throughout the organization, from coaches to rovers to people in the front office, they all say the same thing, that they think he has got a legitimate, really bright future behind the plate. And Jason Kanzler, the farm director, I talked to him the other day, and he just said, like, man, that guy's just worked his ass off, and it showed. So far I haven't seen really nothing has really stood out during the one game, because the second game he ended up DHing. But look, I think when it comes to evaluating a catcher, it's easier to spot them when they're not performing well than when they are performing well. And nothing stood out during that first game for me.
It's encouraging too, I think, especially for a catcher, that he is picking up so much momentum on learning English so quickly. Like, that's important for, I mean, it's important for any player, but like, I think for a catcher, communicating with his pitchers, like, that's incredibly important. And I think the defense is yeah, I mean, it's not, I wouldn't, it's not big league ready right now. Like, the catching is not, he's getting better, like, he's improving, and that's all good. But you're right about the level of hitter that he is, and the age that he is, right? Like, if he's playing his age 21 season. So, like, imagine a scenario where Moises Ballesteros is not one of the best hitters in all of minor league baseball. He is just simply a good hitter, right? He's just a good hitter, and he's 21 years old playing at high A, where he probably should be. We wouldn't be talking about his defense in this way if that was all the case, right? And so I think part of it too is that, like, part of the reason why I'm like, oh, well, is he a catcher in the big leagues this year or in the future? It's because at some point the bat is so damn good that you're just going to need to get the bat in the lineup in Chicago, regardless of where he's playing, and maybe that's DH for a while, and then my worry at that point becomes, all right, he's in the big leagues. Like, how much can he really work on improving his defense on a daily basis? But that's probably a conversation for another day. I guess my point here is that the defense isn't that far behind from where he probably should be realistically, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I think that what gives so many people optimism is that they have faith that, even though it's not where the bat is right now, it'll eventually come close to catching up. I don't think he'll ever be at a level where, it's like the bat's so good that the catching skill set is going to be at that type of level. But at least he's putting himself in a position where it can come kind of in the same neighborhood. And I think, obviously they gave him some reps at first base. They'll probably do that again this year. But I think my limited time seeing him bounce between first base and catcher, I would say he's probably better off behind the plate and has more of a potential there.
All right, man. Let's keep chugging along on some hitters. You want to talk? Let's do Ben Cowles, because he impressed me this weekend. Again, more hard hit balls. He had, I believe, what was it, a couple hits on. He had, yeah, two hits on Friday, and one was a home run. He had a couple of hard. If we're on the trend of hard hit balls, which I apparently am this episode, which I didn't realize I was going to be, but here we are. He had a 105 and a 107 off the bat on Friday. So looked really impressive. He was batting in the 5 hole both days for Marty PV's iCubs.
Yeah, really impressive. Just that bat save was producing. And then I talked about, during BP, watching some of those guys take swings, obviously, with the wind blowing out and stuff like that. I think a lot of the left-handed hitting guys were more pumped, but you could see during BP, like, man, he has some legitimate pop. And he doesn't look like a guy that you're like, man, that guy could do 15 to 20 home runs, but the numbers tell you he's got some really good pop in that bat. So he was impressive to see. And the idea that like it is his AAA debut, you made the really good point about James Triantos like not looking overwhelmed. I didn't think he looked overwhelmed too. I felt like he looked extremely comfortable, ready to roll, and confident that he could face AAA pitching.
I mean, but I was not hypercritical of Ben Cowles when he was out of the 40-man roster. It was a to me a strange move in the grand scheme of how the Cubs assembled middle infield or infielders on this roster, on the 40-man roster over the course of the offseason with the addition of Gage Workman and Vidal Brujan and like there was just and losing Luis Vasquez or getting DFAing him and trading him to the Orioles, and there was a lot of like weird maneuvering of infield depth on the 40-man roster this offseason. And so that addition of Ben Cowles to the 40-man roster, especially after trading for him from the Yankees, him not getting into hardly any games. He got into a couple games with Tennessee last year. It was just kind of like I wasn't skeptical, I wasn't critical. I was just skeptical because like it just seemed weird overall. But I mean, obviously, them sending him to the AFL last year was promising. Him getting into a lot of action in spring training this year was promising. And then if he can ride this hot streak into the regular season, he is on the 40-man roster, right? So like if injuries happen, if problems happen up in Chicago, like he is just one call away in the same way that Luis Vasquez was last year.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised too when it came to the Vasquez stuff, just because, like, man, well, it's like that guy had a great glove, a developing bat that had made monumental moves over the last year, but obviously they felt really good about what they hadn't been. And, I was kind of with you in the aspect that, like, I just didn't know what they had with him. And I still don't know. I've only seen a couple of games, but obviously they kind of feel in that boat that there is a really good skill set by all the signs that you're kind of seeing, like you had said, adding him to the 40 man, sending him to the AFL, getting him a ton of spring training at bats. They obviously wanted to get a real good look at him, and so far it's been pretty impressive.
I mean, I'm sitting here like it's fun that he was batting in the 5 hole, but I'm looking at this lineup from the Iowa Cubs that they trotted out the first 2 days, and I know Jason Kempf hit on this really hard during the broadcast. It's a wild looking lineup and a really difficult lineup to face where you have just super prospect laden at the top, right? You have the first 2 days it was Christian Franklin, it was they had Owen Caissie, Kevin Alcantara, they had James Triantos, Ben Cowles, and who am I missing? They had Moises Ballesteros. Those guys up at the top, and then you add in Dixon Machado, who has been around for a hot minute. He's been in Iowa 3 different times now. You add in a catcher.
The
What
only
was
thing about Machado too is I was thinking about this the other day. It was a couple years ago that Nico Horner ended up making his major league debut. If Dixon Machado had not been hurt at the time, he would have been the guy that ended up going up, and Nico Horner still would have been sitting on his couch during the end of that season. So interesting to see how that plays out too.
Yeah, I mean, that was wild. I mean, because he had just Dixon Machado had just gotten injured, right? And then it was what was the situation? Was it Javi had been injured, and then somebody else was in Chicago, and then it was Dixon got hurt, and then Nico.
Yeah,
So that was kind of what. But yeah, so you have Dixon Machado, and on Friday it was Carlos Perez. On Saturday it was Reese McGuire. But you have those guys at the bottom of the lineup. It's like that's a lineup that doesn't really quit, especially when Dixon Machado was as impressive as he was this weekend. But it's like that's a tough lineup, dude.
yeah, and I think it's a huge help for a lot of those young guys too when you kind of have that mix of veterans, in the lineup to kind of help ease some of the pressure, and then you have a guy like Darius Hill who, he it's amazing to think like what that dude has done over the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, he was tied for all minor league baseball in hits, and was one of the best hitters in the organization. Probably the biggest issue when it comes to a guy like Darius Hill is that there's not like one trait that like really stands out about him. There's not like this massive power. There's not like this massive great glove, great speed. Hughes does a lot of things really well, and unfortunately for him, he's kind of been the odd man out when it comes to some of these roster moves. But when openings have popped up and he's gotten playing time, he's made the most of it. So having guys like him, having guys like Reese McGuire, who put together a really nice game, ended up homering, hit the ball well during that first game. Just kind of having that veteran presence to kind of protect some of the young guys, it's so important to have.
We have gone long enough without talking about the Jaguar. I thought he looked impressive at times. Honestly, the thing that stood out to me the most with Kevin Alcantara this weekend was his outfield assist from left field, which was out. I mean, he's played a lot of center field. He's played some right field. He hasn't played a whole lot of left field in his career. So seeing that outfield assist was maybe like the thing that stood out to me the most from Kevin Alcantara. And it's going to be important because defense is such a big part of what makes his floor high enough as well as that ceiling that we can kind of dream on, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we kind of talk about the outfield prospects and just like sheer athleticism, obviously his like really jumps out because you go back to that old school approach talking about tools and what guys can do, like run, hit, throw, catch, everything. Like Kevin can do that. I think the biggest question mark when it comes to him is going to be, can he reach that ceiling? The potential is all there. He's just got to get some more ABs. He's got to get some more experience and just really show what he can do. But like I said before, he's so talented and so good that at this point, even though Owen Caissie got added to the 40-man roster during the offseason, obviously protect him from Rule 5 eligibility and all that stuff, I would think if the Cubs came calling tomorrow, if Vega got hurt or Tucker, somebody got hurt in the outfield, Alcantara might be the first guy that ends up getting the call.
And that's super exciting to have those two options as guys that could get the call. Speaking of the outfield, let's talk about Christian Franklin because we saw on Saturday on Friday he had a couple hits and a double. The double, so if you guys were watching on MILB.TV, the angle that was captured on the broadcast for the Iowa Cubs of Christian Franklin's double was terrific. It was like the behind the backstop view that it made it look like it was a bomb off the bat, but it was a really cool view off the left center wall for Christian Franklin, and quick bat. He did get thrown out on trying to steal second, and then also got picked off first base, which we saw last year. He was a terrific base runner in terms of the stolen base numbers, but also in terms of like very few caught stealings for Christian Franklin. So those two were very out of the ordinary from Christian this weekend. But again, I mean, he was hitting the top of the order. Him batting lead off for a stacked Iowa Cubs roster is really fun, and part of that is because he draws an incredible amount of walks. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to runs scored as a stat for minor leaguers, but I'd imagine that he's going to be up there in the minor league leaderboards this year.
Would he end up drawing like 70 some walks last 50 some the year before? So he's the guy that's going to get on base. That's kind of what, obviously one of the things you want from your leadoff guy is the guy that's going to see some pitches, get on base. Andy's got some power too. I think 12 home runs a couple of years ago. Probably not as much as they wanted last year, but certainly a guy that has that pop and that ability to get on base too.
One last hitter that we can talk about here is Jonny Long, who great game on Saturday for Jonny Long, 2 for 3 with a walk and a double for him, getting his first taste of AAA, which obviously we knew he rode that hot streak into AA Tennessee last year. He was kind of on the border, like coming into spring training. I had him slated to start off the year in AA Knoxville. He performed well enough in AA last year where he probably deserved the promotion to Iowa. but there's kind of a lot of competing. I mean, Moises Ballesteros can play first. Carlos Perez can play first. Like I kind of erred on the side of caution with Jonny Long, expecting him to start off the year in Double A. But then we saw him in so many games in spring training, where I was like, this front office must really believe in Jonathan Long. And so as the spring training went on, I was like, I think we're going to see this guy as a starting first baseman for the Iowa Cubs. And sure enough, there he was in the lineup both Friday and Saturday.
Well, it helps with the idea that now they don't have Matt Mervis in the organization taking those priority at bats at first base. And like you had said with Ballesteros, I think kind of the focus more is going to be with him behind the plate. And I thought kind of the most impressive thing too with Long too is not only hit the ball well, but made a couple really nice plays, including a leaping grab over at first. So I was pretty impressed by that. And he's a guy that looks like he feels super comfortable at AAA so far too, and he's the guy that's only gotten a couple of years in the org. So for what he's done during that quick time, like he's kind of rapidly moved up through the system at a really good pace. Obviously, he's a college bat, being I think a Long Beach State guy, but still to have that experience, that age, and produce as quickly and move as fastly as he has been pretty impressive.
Yeah, man. It is fun. Like with him being so recently drafted, like that's not typical, obviously. And I think that one thing that stands out for Jonathan Long for me is that the swing is so abnormal looking, right? Like it's not a normal looking swing. And like every level, I'm kind of like, oh, like this is the level where he might get challenged on it. Like that swing may hurt him in some way, shape, or form. And he keeps climbing the ladder and he keeps doing well and he keeps proving me wrong and he keeps saying like, oh, this swing does work. I maybe it's something that like we saw. I mean, we saw Matt Shaw all year last year, and now in Chicago, where it's like Matt Shaw is not a normal looking dude when he swings the bat, and it's obviously works for him. So maybe it's the same case for Jonathan Long. I don't know.
Yeah, Long does a really good job of just getting on base too. He's got decent OPS too. Ended up, I think, with like 24 home runs last year too. So, I mean, he's a guy that has kind of that power, that pop that you want from a corner infielder too. And, you know, kind of the numbers really resemble, um, you know, kind of what Matt Mervis did during that breakout year. I would say when it comes to Jonathan Long, there probably is um, a longer list of resume there to show that he's done it a little bit more consistently. When you look back at what Matt Mervis did, it shocked not only people outside the organization, but I think inside the organization too, where they were never firm believers. I think that's part of the reason why they ended up cutting the cord on Matt Mervis so soon, was that they were like, okay, we just don't have that much faith. But
Yeah.
Jonathan Long, I think, okay, I think they have a little bit more faith in that ability to handle the bat.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think that the Cubs showed time and time again that Matt Mervis was not a guy that they truly believed in. It cracks me up that Matt Mervis was batting in the cleanup spot for the Marlins Major League Club this weekend. That was fun, and I love to see that because I mean I obviously rooting huge for Matt Mervis to succeed in Miami because I think he deserves it. The thing with Jonathan Long in kind of comparing to Matt Mervis that he'll need to stand out in a way even greater than Matt Mervis is two ways. One, he's a righty hitter, and so he's that kind of the short arm or short side of the platoon there, and so he's going to need to hit both sides of like both lefties and righties in a way that Matt Mervis obviously didn't have to because he could platoon and just hit against righties. The other thing is that Jonathan Long, like he has the ability to play third base a little bit or play the corner outfield. I think that's going to be huge for him because he's not going to be a guy that's going to post a 950 OPS in the major leagues. And so you have to have that flexibility to play a little bit more all over the field and provide that bench depth if you need to, because if you're like like we saw with Matt Mervis at the major league level, like if he wasn't hitting right away, as soon as he got called up to the bigs, then there was no use for him in the big leagues, you know? And so with Jonathan Long, like providing value in other places that is not just like hitting the crap out of the ball, and not even be a plus defender at third base or left field or whatever. Just like being able to play those at a major league level is going to be like really, really important for Jonathan Long, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially for the Cubs too, where you look at some of the biggest question marks on this team. Obviously Michael Bush. They're gonna want some other. They're gonna want somebody to face some lefties at sometimes, but also like third base being a question mark at times, especially during this development of Matt Shaw. But that's something that you got to be able to do is produce at multiple positions. If you don't have that skill set that just leaps off the page for you.
I've got a couple pictures that I want to hit on, and then I'll probably open it up to if you had any other comments from opening weekend. But Connor Noland is the guy that we need to talk about from this weekend. I think that like that may have been of all the good performances and all the things to look out for. That was maybe the brightest spot in my eyes outside of the Owen Caissie actually playing situation. Watching Connor Noland pitch, he went on Friday night. He was the Iowa Cubs opening day starter, which is so fun that Connor Noland got that start. He went 4 innings pitched, gave up 2 hits, 1 earned run. He walked 2 and then had 6 strikeouts. The stat line was terrific for Connor Noland, but like what stood out to me the most was how he went about doing it. Right, we saw a low 90s fastball product. It was 90, 91. I think he touched 92 maybe once or twice, which is fun, and that's really important. I think let's talk about that first because I think that's a very important thing for Connor Noland. Where last year he logged some innings in Iowa, but he was hitting 88 a lot with the fastball, and there's a big difference between hitting 88 with the fastball and hitting 91 with the fastball.
Yeah, and I think what kind of would give you a little bit of excitement too is the idea that like, okay, one, the start number one, two, the start and some mid to high 80s weather. So maybe once you get deeper into the season, once he's built up more, once it gets warmer out, what could that V load possibly be? How much more is it going to potentially tick up? I think it's fair to possibly assume maybe 1 or 2 miles an hour at least, which would be a monumental improvement from what we consistently saw from him last year.
Yeah, man, I like that. That's the thing that I was looking for in Connor Noland this year is could he increase the velo? I had him on the show this offseason. If you guys want to go back and listen to that, and we talked about that. We talked about that very thing, and he mentioned that that was a goal of his was to come back and increase his velo a little bit because he knows how big of a difference that makes for his development. There's not a whole lot of major league players out there that are consistently throwing 88, hitting 88 on the gun. So being able to throw 91 to 93 is like the single most important thing when Connor Noland is a guy that commands so well. Like it's not just like, oh, like he's got to hit 93. It's like he's already commanding the zone at whatever velocities that he's throwing. So for him to do that is huge. Another thing was that we saw a lot of it was almost entirely. I think he threw 70, just like 75-ish pitches on Friday night, and almost all of them were fastball slider. He threw a few other. I saw a couple change ups, but it was almost entirely fastball slider.
Yeah, and he just constantly attacked the zone. I think more importantly too, like he went through the lineup maybe 2.5 times. So
Yeah.
people getting multiple looks at him and for an idea of a guy that like isn't going to have overpowering stuff, then kind of the question mark becomes like, okay, how are they going to how many times can you go through a lineup? Obviously, nowadays in today's game, you're going through it 3 or 4 times, but you still have to be able to maneuver 2 or 3 times. And I think the fact they did, um, just with those two pitches, pretty much, is a pretty good sign for him, knowing that, like, okay, I can survive with just those two, but I could potentially break out some other stuff too.
Yeah, that's a good point. He did a really good job. You mentioned the wind blowing out to right field. He did a really good job of keeping the ball on the ground. The first 3 innings, his first 3 innings, he kept the ball on the ground a lot, which was super exciting, and the strikeouts. The 4th inning of work, he had a couple harder hit balls. Actually, technically, again, I keep coming back to this hard hit ball. This was, trust me, this was not part of the game plan for the show. He gave up 0 hard hit balls, 0 balls, 95 miles an hour plus in the 16 batters that I think he faced 16 batters is what it came, or
Yep.
18 something. Yeah. So I don't know, man. That was huge for him not to give up the hard contact. It was great that he was able to keep the ball on the ground, because that's going to be important for him as he potentially makes his major league debut this year. So yeah, I just came away super impressed with Connor Noland, especially on a pitching staff that we're going to see. Cade Horton, we saw Jordan Wicks on Saturday. There are some dudes in that rotation, and on the pitching staff as a whole, but in that rotation, there's some dudes. And once Brandon Birdsell comes back, obviously he'll slot in there. Connor Noland is a name that I think that a lot of prospect nerds love, but I think unless you're a prospect nerd, you aren't as familiar with Connor Noland. And so for him to make that jump into people recognizing him outside of prospect nerds is going to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, and he seems like the type of guy that would be kind of perfect for that middle to long relief type guy where, we could go 3, 4, possibly 5 innings, depending on where, obviously he's not going to be a guy that ends up, jumping up to the majors, and maybe he gets a spot start, something like that moving forward, if he keeps pitching well, keeps proving that the velo is going to stay there and possibly uptick too, and pitching well enough to really earn that opportunity. But he has got the arsenal to be kind of that swingman bullpen type starting pitcher type of dude.
Have you talked to him about his time at Arkansas when he was the two-way player down there?
No, not yet, but I really want to. I heard he could rake.
Yeah, well, so and he also played for the football team. So he was two-way on the field, and he was also two-way in terms of multi-sport, because he started the homecoming game his freshman year at Arkansas. He was I believe he said he was roommates with Jerry Jones's grandson when he was at Arkansas.
Well, and it's amazing to think about like all the athletes that the Cubs have really gone after over the last couple of years. Where you think about, you had mentioned Cade Horton, who's a really good quarterback coming out of high school, ended up walking on at Oklahoma. I know one of your big people on the show, Bryce Wyndham, was just a stud basketball player. He's coaching high school basketball now. But there were a ton of guys throughout the organization who are like that, where especially nowadays, you see so many guys specializing in a specific sport, but they've got a lot of dudes that can play multi sports. And I think at one point PCA was, no, I don't think he played football in high school, but I don't think his parents would let him. I think that was the deal, but I mean, he's a dude that looks like he could have gone and played wide receiver for somebody as well.
Dude, imagine PCA lining up in the slot. Oh, that
Oh,
would be incredible.
I've seen the videos of him during spring training, and then have to watch throw the football around that principal park in the outfield. And there's so many times I'm like, oh my god, like that dude would would kill it on the football field.
And Brennan Davis was a all-state defensive like player of the year or something like that in high school.
Really good basketball player too. So, and that's another guy that's going to be really interesting to follow. Obviously, he's with the Yankees now, but like he has just constantly been hurt over the years, and kind of the thing that like you worry about is all the injuries have just taken such a massive toll on his body. Where when he was coming up through the org, like you were talking about, is the guy that has power, he has speed, he can throw, he can feel his position. But the injuries have just taken such a toll that, like, okay, the speed has gone down. You wonder how much the power has disappeared. You just want to know what a guy like Brennan Davis could do if he stayed healthy and got consistent ABs.
All right, last guy I want to talk about here, and we'll wrap up, is not technically a prospect anymore, but because he's been so up and down, I want to talk about him, and that's Daniel Palencia. Because we saw Daniel Palencia go on Friday night. He went 1 inning. He gave up zeros across the board, except for the fact that he struck out 2 guys. Fastball sitting 99 to 101. I think he might have touched like 101.8 or something like that once. He bringing absolute gas. I mean, you've had a front row seat to Danny P over the past few years. Just electric, man.
I mean, I've said it for a while that I think he could be a big league closer. I think he's got all the intangibles that you want out of a eighth, ninth inning guy, whatever it is. I think he could be. I kind of expected with how the bullpen ended up playing out last night with Eli Morgan struggling. My first thought was that Eli Morgan was probably going to get sent down. Daniel Palencia ends up getting called up. That seemed like the right move, especially with the timing, given they had just pitched on Friday. But like, man, when he is on, like he is one of the best young arms that I've seen in terms of bullpen arms in the Cubs system in a long, long time. I mean, filthy fastball, um, great slider. I mean, just when he is attacking the zone, like it's game over. I mean, and kind of like what we were talking about when it comes to the velo for Noland. Now, granted, I don't know how much more. Once you're talking about 99, 100, there probably isn't a ton more in the tank. But once again, we're talking about March in Iowa and his first outing of the year and lighting up the radar gun. So it really makes you wonder, like once we get into May and the season's flowing and stuff like that, like what are we gonna be seeing from him? And I think like you have just seen so much growth from him in terms of comfortability, experience, and coming out of the bullpen. I mean, he was a starter um for a long time too, and they had to send him to. I believe they sent him to Arizona for a little bit during that first year, just to get him into that rhythm of
Yeah.
coming out of the bullpen. So, I remember at one point he had told me K Rod had reached out to him like early in his career and seen some of his videos and was like, dude, you you could be really, really good. And I think the more he gets out there and the stage gets bigger, I think people are going to be really impressed by what he can do. Obviously, you and I know, and I think a lot of Cubs fans do, but like to if he could just get a little bit more consistent, which I think he's at a point where he will be, like we're getting to a point with him where he could go up and that's it. We don't see this bouncing back up and down anymore for a guy like him.
And he incorporated a splitter. So he's throwing that a little bit. He threw that a few times on Friday night. I think that like Cubs fans look at a guy like Jeremiah Estrada, who the Cubs ended up shipping over to or losing to San Diego, and they're like, why can't the Cubs have Jeremiah Estrada again? And I think that you're looking at Daniel Palencia, and you're like, that could be the Cubs Jeremiah Estrada this year. I'll only last thing I'll say on Daniel Palencia is something that co-host Brian Smith actually said over in our 1060 West Discord channel. But he mentioned that he was maybe most impressed with Daniel Palencia when it was 3-2 count. I don't know how they got to the 3-2 count, but it was a 3-2 count. Fans on the whole crowd was on their feet. Everyone was going crazy, and he dropped a slider in to strike a guy out. And like that is what Brian said, and I completely agree. Is like that is a big moment for Daniel Palencia, where like command and control has been such an issue, and like being able to rise to the occasion when the crowd is on their feet and it's a full count and the game is in the ninth inning, like that is just so important for Daniel Palencia. And the fact that he dropped a slider in there to strike him out is just shows how in control of the situation that he was, and we need more of that to prove that he's major league ready. And I think that like if he can do that and keep doing that, that's terrific. It's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah, he's going to be a blast to watch, and like I said, I still envision him being down here very long because of how much he has grown over the last couple of years, over the last year, and then based off of what the need is already in Chicago.
All right, Tommy. Any anything I missed? Any overarching storylines that we should that you're keeping an eye on over the next few weeks?
I'm just excited to see Cade Horton finally pitch. I mean, I missed him last year. I was on parental leave when he got called up from Double A and Triple A, and then a lot of the people I talked to some of the scouts had seen him in Double A last year. Had actually thought like, okay, he was dealing with some of the shoulder stuff when he was in Double A, and kind of tried to pitch for it, when he was getting called up to Triple A, and obviously, potentially getting to big league. So, I really want to see him. I want to see him healthy, what he can do, and that's the number one thing. A lot of these guys I've already seen. I've seen a ton of Owen Caissie. I've seen a ton of Ballesteros. Obviously, I've seen some of Triantos, so I'm excited to see more of him and Alcantara. But Kate Horn's the guy that I'm most excited and most interested to really see.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think being excited about the top pitching prospect in the organization, that's a fair thing
I'm,
to be excited about. What's up?
I'm a simple guy.
All right, Tommy. Where can the people find you? Where can they read you? How can they access your work?
Yeah, check out DesMoinesRegister.com, or follow me on Twitter at Tommy Birch. That's BI, not BU. So BIRCH. And uh, drop me a mention, chat with me, follow along during iCubs games. It's fun to catch up with fans.
Yeah, man. Each year, I mean, I think that it's always a reminder to check out Tommy and his work, whether it's on Twitter or over the Des Moines Register. But like the beginning of the season for the Iowa Cubs is like that. It's like, oh, like it's back to Tommy Birch's time to shine. As far as us, I mean, you're obviously doing great work elsewhere. In with Iowa State women's basketball and all that good stuff. But for the folks listening to this podcast, like you're bringing the heat with all the Iowa Cubs action. So thank you so much, Tommy. Thanks for coming on the show. Can't thank you enough. Everybody out there listening, I apologize. We've still been working with a wonky schedule here. This week, this episode's dropping on Tuesday. This week, I will be coming at you with the the Knoxville Smokies season preview ahead of the season opener on Friday. So that'll be coming out later this week in preparation for that. And then at that point, I promise we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming in terms of episodes dropping each Tuesday morning throughout the season. I've spoken with Brian. I've spoken with Zumac. We're good to go as far as all that goes. It's just been kind of wonky over the past few weeks getting these previews out. And as we prepare for the season. But by the time we talk to you next time, me and Brian will be on these airwaves a week from today, and we'll be talking about a system-wide action, all the action going on throughout the entire farm system. So that'll be super, super fun. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back in your ears in just a few short days. Take care.
Yo.